Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and I've got a little bit of a confession I'm going to make here at the top of this video. You see, I very much have a whole lot of love for the original PlayStation. This rectangular gunmetal colored beauty, I absolutely love this system. I was infatuated with it when I was younger. I really wanted one of these. I eventually ended up getting my own, and even though we are up to really the PlayStation 5 now at this point, the original PlayStation 1, seeing it, utilizing it, handling it such as this, upgrading it, working on it, modifying it, playing the game library on not just this, but even newer iterations like the PS2, PS3, even running it through emulation on, PS4 and such, and PS5, I suppose, and portably on the Vita and PSP and really everything. I love the PlayStation, is what I'm saying. I can't really stress that enough here. However, when I end up seeing some projects that are related to the original PlayStation that seem to be within grasp and something I want to try out, I like to highlight those when I can, give them a shot, and I think this would be a great opportunity here. So in comes a project here called the PicoMemcard. Now for anybody who does not know, this is a really cool open source project from the developer Daniel Giuliani, who has worked on both hardware and software for this. This is, as it states here, a memory card for the original PlayStation that utilizes the Pico. For anybody who does not know, this is specifically the RP2040 chip put onto the footprint of whatever board you're choosing on here. Now there's two that this has been built out for specifically, but if you do not know and you haven't really been super cognizant of the video game modding community, the RP2040 chip has become a fan favorite in recent times. We've seen this thing power projects such as a Game Boy capture card, a Xbox 360 NAND reading and writing tool, a GameCube mod chip, and we're now even seeing Switch glitch chips for this. But in this instance here, we're going to be bringing it back to basics with something that we've lost for better or for worse, really making memory cards from scratch. Really using the power of this project here, the hardware and software from it, you can go ahead, create your own hardware, and pair it up with either one of two boards. You can pair it up with a Raspberry Pi Pico, which is definitely a favorite, or the RP2040. Whichever one of these you choose, or even if you go with both of them, you can combine these with, as I said, the open source hardware, the open source software here, and you can create your own memory card for the original PlayStation from scratch. It is worth noting that there are two variations of this as well. There is the PicoMemcard, which is what we'll be looking at in this video, and there is the PicoMemcard Plus, which I do want to dedicate its own video to. But this time around, we're just going to be looking at the PicoMemcard because this was the first project here and something that I would like to highlight and, kind of show the evolution up to the PicoMemcard Plus. So without further ado, we can go ahead and get into this, but I would like to say, if you're going to be fabricating some of these things here, it would be good to thank and give a shout out to the sponsor of this video here, PCBWay. Now, PCBWay has sponsored me a couple times here, one of them just for a random video and another one for a previous project that I had looked at here. And if you are looking to get, printed circuit boards such as these made or any type of other prototyping, whether it be printed circuit boards, getting flex cables made, any type of CNC machining, 3D printing as well too, which we're going to touch up on a little bit of that. PCBWay has been fantastic for that. In fact, we can actually go over to the computer here and I'll show you how you can get your own printed circuit boards for the PicoMemcard printed through PCBWay. The links for everything here will be down below in the description, but what you can do is go over to the PicoMemcard GitHub repository, and first let's go ahead and just download this. So for this, you can click on Code, click on Local, and download this as a zip and save it somewhere you can easily find it. Next up, we're going to need the firmware, so you can click on Releases and find the latest compiled firmware. Now for this, we're not going to be downloading PicoMemcard Plus. We're going to need to scroll down a bit, and we're going to need to look for the latest version of PicoMemcard, just the regular version here. When you find the latest version of PicoMemcard, here it would be version 1.0.0 at the time of recording this, you can click on Assets, and then download the UF2 files needed. If you're using the Pico itself, the Raspberry Pi Pico, you would use PicoMemcard UF2. And if you're using the RP2040, you would download the UF2 file for the RP2040. make sure you're downloading the standard PicoMemcard, not PicoMemcard Plus. Once everything is downloaded somewhere you can easily find it, you should have your compiled firmware files, and you should also have the source code itself. From here, you can grab this zip file, right-click, and use something such as 7-zip to extract it out. When you go in here, you should have a PicoMemcard PMC release folder, and inside of here is a lot that you're going to need. For what we're doing, we're going to need some PCBs. So inside of here, you can go to the PCB folder, and you're going to have some PCBs for the Pico. This is just the standard one itself, as well as the RP2040 version. We'll have the Gerber files, backups, as well as some others right here. Now, for what you're going to be doing, what I'd recommend is when you pull this from the latest source, you can go over to whichever one you're using. For example, if I want to get these pressed up for the Raspberry Pi Pico, go inside of here. The Gerbers are all right here, and you can quite literally grab this Gerber folder, right-click it, and we can send it to a new zip file. And we can call this something such as Gerber Pico, just something along those lines. If you're also wanting the RP2040 ones, you can do the exact same thing. Go here, go into the Gerbers, verify they're right there, and do the exact same thing as before. Compress them into a zip file, and we can call this one Gerber RP2040, something along those lines. And I'm even going to move them out so I know where they're at. So I'm just going to move them with the rest of my files right here. Now, if you're getting the PCBs themselves all pressed up through PCBWay, you can go over to PCB Instant Quote and click on this right here. Then this is how easy it is. You click on Quick Order PCB. You then click on Add Gerber File, and then upload the zip file that you're wanting pressed up. Here, if you're going to use the Pico one, for example, just go ahead and upload it. From here, you can go in and customize it further. For example, if you want to change the solder mask, like on mine, I decided to go emo again with this one, so I went with the black right here with the white silk screen, and you can modify any of these other parts right here to your own liking, as long as you're understanding what's going on.
Black.
Everything must be black, like the storm of justice.
Well, maybe you better talk to them then.
However, one thing you want to do is change up the thickness. For me, I decreased it over to 0.8 millimeters thickness, and that seemed to work quite well for me. Now from there, as I said, you can customize it further, and you can even order more if you want to. That is totally up to you. And at this point, really, once you have the thickness and everything else dialed in, you can then save it to cart and continue on. If you're doing this with the RP2040, it's the exact same thing as before. Like I said, just go ahead, upload that zip file, make sure you have everything dialed in how you want it, and for the thickness, I would recommend decrease that to 0.8 millimeters, and then continue on. Now, if you're wanting a 3D printed case for this, which I do recommend, you can print this yourself if you have a 3D printer, or you can rely on someone else, such as, well, PCBWay, who also does 3D printing. Back over at the PicoMemcard repository, you can scroll down and go over to the 3D printed case section. There is a case that Daniel had ended up designing, and there's a few others right here as well too that you can check out just to see what all you want. Let's go ahead and go with the standard one right here. You can come right here, see a few examples of everything printed up, and then at this point, if you like this, you can download the files. You will want to extract these out. So once you have the zip file, you will want to right click and extract this into its own folder for the enclosures. Once you go into the enclosures here, you do have the images that we saw on the listing and the files themselves right here, and you can get your cases printed up with these STL files. For this, I still used PCBWay. If you want to get something 3D printed, you can come over to 3D printing here and click on 3D printing. Make sure 3D printing has been selected, and from here, go ahead and upload the STL file. Once it's been uploaded, you can then set your quantity, how many you want. For example, let's say I want 10 right here. That's all good, and then you can also pick your material. Now, you can definitely search and see what exactly you're wanting to use. For me, personally, I end up going with ABS on this, and I end up choosing black with a 20% infill, and that worked pretty well for me. And once everything has been dialed into your liking, you can submit this request and continue on. So there we go. Once you're all done with an order like that, you should hopefully get some printed circuit boards that look a little something like this, and you can use these to build a little something like this. I would like to give another thank you and shout out to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. My experiences with them have been great. I hope you all have some good experiences with them as well too. And if you are new to getting onto PCBWay and giving them a shot, you can click the link down below in the description of this video. And for any new users who make a new order, you'll be able to get $5 worth of promotional credit to use on PCBWay. So hopefully that helps out with your future endeavors and projects. Either way, getting back to this here, PicoMemcard allows you to quite literally create a memory card for the original PlayStation from scratch. And once it is all set up, the nice benefit of this as well too is that you would be able to, even when you save games to this, once you back up your memory card, you can quite literally plug in your RP2040 or your Raspberry Pi Pico to your computer, and you can back up your saves that way when they are saved to the actual memory card image. You can also easily download saves from the internet. If they are not compatible just yet, you can convert them over to work in the memory card image format for this, and then you can run them right here from the memory card itself. Now, for someone like me who really dreamed of having a DEX drive back in the day, this is absolutely a dream come true. You don't have to hunt down a DEX drive, you don't have to do any crazy building, as long as you are happy enough using a soldering iron, which I personally enjoy working on these here, and as long as you can manage the software side of this pretty easily, you're able to accomplish that task reasonably well. Now, the nice thing is with PicoMemcard is that this is just one implementation of it here. You see, there's a few options that you can go with, one of them being that you can even carve out an original memory card for the original PlayStation and then still use one of these boards here. However, I'm one of those people, if I can, not sacrifice other hardware, and if I can just do something from scratch like this, I absolutely love being able to do that. Now let's talk about the actual assembly and getting everything built out, because I'm mostly going to be focusing on the printed circuit board variant of this. Now, as you can see, there's not all too much to it here. There's just the printed circuit board, and then you end up soldering your Raspberry Pi Pico or your RP2040 onto it. And I'm going to have some footage up here as well too, if you want to even guide yourself through it. Thankfully, it wasn't all too hard to do in regards to this. Now, when I built out the PCB, I did specify using 0.8 millimeters thickness, so make sure you're going with that. And once I did that, it seemed to work just fine on my implementation here. And then when you're actually going through the build out process itself, of course, you're going to need some basic soldering skills. These do not include the actual Picos themselves, so you will have to get a hold of those boards. Now, you can get a hold of them locally on Amazon, eBay, AliExpress, as long as they do the job and they work. First of all, I would also recommend, once you get these Pico boards, that you do program them and flash them before you end up installing them, just so you can verify that they work. If you want to do that, it's very simple to do. For programming the Raspberry Pi Pico or RP2040, you're going to want to hold down the boot or boot cell button and then plug in the device into your computer while you're still holding down that button. When you see a USB drive like this pop up, you want to release it and enter it right here. It should look a little something like this. Now, in order to flash this with the PicoMemcard firmware, you're going to want to go and find the UF2 file. Remember, the standard one is for the Raspberry Pi Pico. The RP2040 one is for the RP2040. So go ahead, grab the firmware file that you're needing, right click, copy this, then go into the USB drive that has just shown up and paste it right here. After a few seconds, it should disconnect, and from here it would be good to physically disconnect the Pico and then connect it back up. And it should look a little something like this. It's going to be incredibly small because this is just enough storage for exactly one memory card image. Now, in order to get your memory card image, you can go to the PicoMemcard source that you have downloaded, go into the extracted files, go into Docs, Images, and there's going to be two right here, an empty one and a sample one. I'd recommend going with the sample one. Go into here, you can right click, copy out the memcard.mcr file, and paste it into the root of this USB drive. Once it's been pasted over, go back here, right click, and eject your device. Now, one thing to keep in mind that can also help avoid some confusion, if you're downloading memory card images from the internet, for example, if you're going to be trying free PSX boot, which I did try on here, you might be a little bit confused because several memory card images are going to be in .mcd format. Here's the thing. They're the same format. Just rename it from MCR to MCD and make sure the file name itself is really just memcard.mcr. Once it is like that, whatever image you downloaded on the internet, as long as it is MCD, just rename it accordingly, copy it over to your drive itself, and then eject it. And that's it. All the programming on your Pi Pico or your RP2040 is now complete. You should have it flashed with the firmware and sitting there with a compatible memory card image. From here, we can now work on the physical installation. So here's what I did for the Raspberry Pi Pico. First of all, I made sure I was using my anti-static mat. If you want to use an equivalent or if you want to use the same mat, that is up to you. I don't have any helping hands here. I just have my own two hands, so this is what I was working with. But I wanted to make sure everything was nice and stable. So what I did was I took a few pieces of Kapton tape and I taped it onto my mat itself to make sure that the printed circuit board was not going anywhere. Next up, I then took the Raspberry Pi Pico and I lined it up. Now, this, in my opinion, from what I'm observing here, it looks like the priority, and I guess it feels like the priority was more for the Raspberry Pi Pico, with it being so readily available, and on top of that, just like fitting beautifully on this. Just like this was just perfect. So what you'll need to do is just line up your Raspberry Pi Pico exactly like this. It should fit in there perfectly. Just make sure you're matching all of the pads to all the points that you're going to be soldering to, and you want to make sure it is flat as well. Once everything has been sorted, just take a few strips of Kapton tape and tape it across the Raspberry Pi Pico. We're not going to be hitting all the points here, but we just want to make sure it is nice, secure, and stable for when we start anchoring everything down. From here, make sure you have your soldering iron heated up, and I would recommend having some flux and then of course your solder. Now as for flux, I've used both no clean flux as well as flux paste. Really using whichever one you're comfortable with, and as long as you clean it up afterwards, that's fine. For these several installs, I actually end up using no clean flux and it was just fine. So that's what I would recommend doing. Go ahead, take some flux, and the first things we're going to do is we're going to tack in the corners. So these ones don't have to be perfect initially. What I even did was I just put some flux right there, then I put a little bit of solder onto my soldering iron and just tacked it in a little bit. These joints do not look good right now, but that is just to get the Pico board in place. Once you have at least a couple corners in place, you can then go back and then you can add more flux, add more solder, and then hit these points with your hot soldering iron while introducing some fresh solder. And then they should be looking nice and beautiful and shiny. So what I like to do is hit the 4 corners of the board itself, and then I even hit the 3 debug points right here just to get it nice and anchored in place. And once that Pico's not going anywhere, you can then remove the Kapton tape securing it down and go in and finish all the rest of the points for your Pico. Just go in, do that, and it should be pretty self-explanatory. I'm showing it right here, and as you can see, it's nothing all too bad. Thankfully, the Pico is, in my opinion, easy to solder to. The points here for the pads are pretty big, and you just want your solder to look a little something like this. Make sure it is flowing nicely, make sure it is nice and shiny, and you are good to go on that. And from there, you're done. If you want to, you can remove all of your Kapton tape and start looking at your work and make sure everything looks good. Make sure all your joints are looking good, make sure your work is complete, and as long as everything is connected properly, from here, you can just work on cleaning everything up. And that's about it. Now for the RP2040, it is pretty much about the same thing, except you're working with a smaller interface. Again, just take your printed circuit board, I would recommend securing it down, and then take your RP2040 and make sure you get it nice and lined up. I felt like this one was a little bit harder to do than the Pi Pico itself, but that might also just be because it is a smaller footprint here. Once you have it nice in place and you make sure everything is flat, make sure you secure it down as best as you can. We don't have to make sure it's super perfect by any means, but just make sure that it is secured down well enough that it's not going to be moving anywhere. And from there, you just do the exact same thing. You go ahead, take some flux, and I'd recommend tacking in the points themselves that are on the corners. Now again, when you first do this, you just need to tack them in so they don't need to look good initially, but once you get at least a couple corners down, you can then revisit and go to all the corners and get them down properly. Once you have your board nice and secured to the PCB itself, you can then remove the Captain tape again, just like we did before, and then work on all the rest of the points. You want to make sure all the points are connected nicely, everything is sufficient here, and you have some good work connecting your actual RP2040 board to the printed circuit board itself. So just go around and do all those other points. Once you've hit all those points successfully, yet again, you can remove the tape from your printed circuit board and you can check out your work. And once this is all done here, whether you're doing the Pi Pico or you're doing the RP2040 or the both of them, you can then go ahead and clean these up. Now, I just used some isopropyl alcohol. I personally use 99% isopropyl alcohol, sprayed these down, used some Q-tips, also used a toothbrush as well too to get it nice and cleaned up, and then just let it sit for a little bit just to make sure everything is going to be dried up. And after a sufficient amount of time, you should be all good to go. And congratulations, you've now finished the software portion, the hardware portion, and you're really ready to work on getting this in your original PlayStation. Now, here is something to keep in mind, right? You can see the memory card port here on the original PlayStation, and right here I have my Pi Pico, and if you connect it in right there, it doesn't really stay like stable in there. I guess in this one it can a little bit, but like I wouldn't really trust this. So you do need some type of casing for this. That would be recommended. Now, Daniel had said over on his GitHub repository that if you want to use kind of a janky setup, you can actually take like a piece of paper and like fold it on top and then slide it into the PlayStation like that. I wouldn't recommend that. I'm not sure if he would really recommend it either. It's more just a solution, but not the best solution. So there are a few 3D printed cases that you can use, and one of them is this, for example. This here is a 3D printed case that works for the Raspberry Pi Pico variant of this, and really just getting this set up, it might be a little bit difficult initially, but what I recommend doing is you kind of just slide it in like that, and you're going to have to push it forward a bit through the notches that keep it locked down, and at that point it should look a little something like this. And from there, once it is all connected up, you can then take your new memory card itself that looks a little something like this, go over to your PlayStation, connect it up like so, and as you can see, it feels right, it goes in properly, and when you check out the memory card itself in the BIOS, which I recommend doing, you should hopefully see some saves there. Now, this is where you're also able to troubleshoot. Thankfully, there are LEDs on these boards, and they are quite easy to see what's going on here. So first of all, if you plug this into your original PlayStation and you don't see any LEDs shining from this, that means that there is something wrong with your connection from the Pi Pico or the RP2040 itself to the actual printed circuit board. So what I would recommend doing is pull it out of the PlayStation, go back over to your table where you're working at, and go and triple check all of the points. If you need to go and reflow all the points because you don't see anything specific, go ahead and do so. But there's either at least a point that you did not solder properly, or maybe one that you ended up missing. As long as everything is on there, you should be okay. However, if you hook this up and you get a flashing LED, that means that there's an issue with the memory card image installed onto the Pi Pico or the RP2040 itself. In fact, maybe you were like me and you even forgot to put the image on there. Like I said, connect it up normally to your computer, go ahead and grab a memcard.mcr image. One of them is provided, actually two of them are provided in the GitHub repository itself. Copy and paste it onto the device itself like a USB drive, eject it, and try it again. However, if everything is working properly and you have put the image on there successfully, you should see a solid LED color. That means that your PicoMemcard is working, and on top of that, you have a successful image on there. So you should be all good to go at that point. From there, go into the memory card section, and if you're able to see saves on there, or if you play a game and you're able to save successfully to your memory card, congratulations, you're really all good to go at that point. Now, a few other things to keep in mind as well too. When you are saving to the memory card itself, you're going to notice that the LED is going to flash a little bit. A good thing to keep in mind here, when your LED is flashing, you do not want to disturb the memory card itself. So once everything is saved, like if you're playing a game, you're saving your game, you're saving it to the PicoMemcard, and your LED is flashing, that means that there is changes that have not been synced up yet. Once your LED is a solid light again, you're good to go, and you can then remove your PicoMemcard if you wish to, or turn off your console. Just keep that in mind. It's pretty simple there, but as long as your LED is showing a solid color, you're in a good position at that point. You should be all good to go. Now, I've been working with this, I've been testing it myself on my original PlayStation consoles, and honestly, I really have no complaints with the actual device itself here. The firmware seems to be sound, it seems to do the job. I really do like the different indicators with the LEDs on there, so that is really nice. Now, I've used it on the original PlayStation and the PlayStation 2 with PS1 saves with no issue, and I would honestly say I don't see why this would not work on any type of device that is taking a PlayStation 1 memory card interface that works with that. So really, as long as you're able to hook up a PS1 memory card to some kind of device, whether it's a PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, or whatever type of thing out there, and as long as it's able to work properly, the PicoMemcard should work on that, because this is really just working as a memory card right here. I do also like the reliability with this, and by that I mean there are original Sony memory cards out there which, you know, usually seem to do the trick just fine. There's also third-party memory cards from back in the day, such as these ones right here. However, one thing that is mentioned on the GitHub repository is counterfeit memory cards, or I kind of lovingly call them, you know, bootleg memory cards, clone memory cards. Sometimes these can work, sometimes these can have issues. Now, the issues that you could run into are, of course, save corruption. Maybe you can't fill up the memory card properly, or maybe you're trying to do something on there and it just doesn't work properly. One thing, for example, is using the free PSX boot project. If you're utilizing that, you do have to essentially carve out a memory card in order to do that. Not physically carve it out, but really you're reflashing the entire memory card. And I have talked with people and run into people who've had the issue where they were getting those bootleg or third-party or knockoff memory cards, and they weren't able to use them for free PSX boot, unfortunately. However, there's been no issue using that with PicoMemcard. I end up downloading the latest version of free PSX boot. I tried slot 1, slot 2, I tried it on multiple different systems, and again, as long as you copy that image over and you rename it to memcard.mcr, it works beautifully. It works just fine. It's a fantastic implementation. So if you're just looking to utilize one memory card, that's all good. Or even if you're looking to back up saves, like for example, if you have saves on an older memory card from your childhood, if you just want to copy the saves onto the Memcard Pico and then back that up onto your computer, that's a fantastic use of this as well too. Now, what about any downsides to using this? Well, I will say, first of all, this does require soldering. In my opinion here, I don't think the soldering is all too difficult, and if you've done some projects and you've worked with small components such as this doesn't seem to be all too difficult. I personally felt like the Raspberry Pi Pico implementation was the easier one of the two, so if you're looking for something easy, I think this is a fantastic novice soldering project to get into if you're looking to get into the world of PCB prototyping, working on your own PCBs, even just, you know, soldering up something like this to get it to a working state. I think this is a fantastic beginner project to work on. The RP2040 is a little bit harder to solder to, but it's certainly still possible. So I think that's great overall. But do keep in mind, if you're going to be doing this yourself, it does require soldering. Secondly is when it comes to the actual cases themselves. Now, I was just using the case that was available on the repository itself, the main one that was linked, and this was odd, right? I'm using the, as you can see, the one for the Raspberry Pi Pico. It's big. As you can see, it does show a lot of the PCB here. I personally like the hacky look of it. I know not everybody will be crazy about it, but, you know, that's everyone's own preference there. This one, though, for the Raspberry Pi Pico, gets the job done. No issue. It might be a little hard to fit it in initially, and I will say I also got this printed with ABS. That was it. So ABS seemed to work fine for this here. However, this is another reason why I feel like this was probably a little more meant for the Raspberry Pi Pico itself as opposed to the RP2040. You see, I was actually more excited to get my hands on the RP2040 and try this out because it is a smaller memory card and I really did want to give this a shot here. Now thankfully this does work, however, there is also a case that you could print out for this. And I'm not quite sure what happened with the case or what happened with the design here. Quite literally, I downloaded the STL files, I had them printed out, and the odd thing is this is kind of flipped in a way. So I guess the design kind of confuses me on there. It is a little bit difficult to actually get it in there, but you'll even notice that you can get the actual printed circuit board. Just the printed circuit board alone, you can pop it in there just fine. However, as soon as you add on any extra boards to it, such as the RP2040, that's where this falls apart, because there's this notch right here, which from what I can tell is so the USB Type-C port can stick out there, but it's on the wrong side, which is really strange, because the memory card is supposed to go in like this, but you could see that the USB port is completely obstructed right here, so it's not going to go in there cleanly, unfortunately. So that was a little disappointing. And I really tried, and I tried, and I tried, and don't worry, I didn't break anything. Well, kind of. But I was like looking, and I was like, what am I missing here? Like, what am I missing? Because even the orientation on the Pico itself is fine, but on the RP2040, it seemed like this was just reversed. Like, it seemed, I don't know, it just seemed like it was reversed. However, I didn't fix it, but I got it to work, right? I kind of realized this is a 3D printed part, and this is malleable, and we can modify it. So what I did was, I just kind of cut it. And it's nothing pretty, mind you. This is the little nub of plastic that I have right now, but as you can see, I can take it, I can connect it up like this, just fine, looks a little something like that, right? And I can then take this all now and hook it up to my original PlayStation, and it goes in there just like so, and it works. So I don't think that's like a huge deal, mind you, but just do keep in mind that the latest one that I was using, at least for the case design, it works just fine for the Raspberry Pi Pico, but when it comes to the RP2040, I think it was just like flipped around on accident. I think that's what happened. So really the only other downside to this project itself, in my opinion, is it would be nice if there was functionality that you could use on the board itself for multiple memory cards. You see, you can just go over to your computer, back up your current memory card, wipe the one that's on here, then go in and, save more games and do all of that. You can do that just fine. And I'm sure people will back up their games that way. Well, their game saves, I should say. However, it would be nice because I'm pretty sure there's going to be more storage that's available on here itself. It would be nice if there was even just megabytes available, like as opposed to like 200 kilobytes being available, if there was 5 megabytes, 10 megabytes available, and you could have multiple memory cards on there, or you could make multiple memory cards and swap between them on here, kind of like some of those old, really cool, but really quirky memory cards that we saw for the original PlayStation, where some of them held 2 storage, 4 storage, some of them held up to 9 memory cards worth of storage. So I think it would be cool, and I think if it's possible, and I guess I'll just say if it is possible on there, I think that would be a fantastic addition to PicoMemcard itself. If there could be multiple memory card support just using the Raspberry Pi Pico itself, because I think there's probably a little more that can be utilized on that, but either way, still cool to have. Now, as for my own thoughts and opinions on this, like wrapping it all up here, I think this is a pretty great project. I think, again, if you're wanting to revisit the original PlayStation, if you're wanting to mess around with some memory card shenanigans, like backing up your old saves, you just need a reliable memory card, or you're wanting something with free PSX boot on there, you don't want to carve out an old memory card, you can't find a reliable original memory card, or you don't want to mess around with, a counterfeit memory card, and there are ways where you can modify that to work with the Pico itself, but again, I went with the printed circuit board. And that's even another thing. If you want to get into prototyping and you really want to kind of get your feet wet with that, I think this is a phenomenal project that can really kind of start you off on that path. And I think this is great. So a big shout out and thank you to Daniel Giuliani for really working on this and releasing this to the public. I think this is great. I really don't have too many bad things to say on it, just some recommendations. Like I said, if there could be multiple card supports for the original PicoMemcard project, that'd be awesome. And then the case itself for the RP2040, I think this is just, I think this is just an accident here, just like kind of flipping this around, but if that can be resolved within the STL file, I think that would be great. Now, some people out there might be at the end of this and wondering, wait, that's it? There's nothing else to this here? It's just the memory card? Like just one memory card image? That's it? You can't do anything else? Well, for people like you, there is the PicoMemcard Plus. That is really the newer implementation of PicoMemcard, which seems to be updated more often now and is getting more of the support these days, and that is something that has expandable storage. So you already know where this is going. I plan to do another video on that as well too, because that is a really nice, fun project and addition that makes something like this even better. And I feel like PicoMemcard Plus is what a lot of people are looking for in a project like this. So stay tuned for that video. Anyways, that is about it for this video here. This is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. And I do want to give another thank you and shout out to the video sponsor here, PCBWay. They were awesome to work with in regards to getting these 3D printed shells and the printed circuit boards printed up. And from my testing here, they seem to work pretty well. Anyways, that is about it for this video. Thank you all very much for watching.